Stupid mics. All right. Hey, everybody.
I was freaking out because I wasn't getting the audio and I didn't want to talk to interrupt you.
Yeah. It's Thursday night. It's more time for more Shufflebus action. I have them. I no longer software mute my mic because I'm so worried about touching anything on the sound settings on my rig. So instead, I just hard mute it and then I forget and I can't see the light blinking at me because because I've got a pop filter in the way. So I'm like, yeah, nothing's coming through. It's pretty awesome. It's Thursday night. Welcome to the bus. I hope you're all ready for
Thursday night.
For a ride. Got with me as always is Neil. Hi Neil, how are you?
Good.
Good. I just got done sorting 6 boxes of Flesh and Blood.
That sounds like not very much fun.
No, not at all. It's an absolute ton of work, obviously, to do that. But yeah, hey, it is what it is. That's what happens when you buy 6 boxes of Flesh and Blood. If I don't want to do it, I just don't have to buy the product, right? How many dust blades? I got 2, 1 cold foil and 1 non-cold foil Inquisitor. But I had really good pulls in 6 boxes. 2 legendaries, the Ram's Head Shield, which is obviously the Chase legendary. I had a couple of cold foil pulses. I had really good pulls in those 6 boxes. I can't really complain at all. I bought all the boxes right, which is the best way to do it, of course. And so, yeah, if you want to see me make those pulls, they're on the VOD from yesterday. That's about a 2-hour stream I did. I opened all 6 boxes live. I did get a Spellbound Creepers, and then the Rampart of the Ram's Head, and then a couple of other comical foils, and a bunch of Majestic foils as well, obviously. I had really, I think we ended up with nearly 50 Majestics across 6 boxes. Which is pretty good. They say the average ends up being 7 to 9 when you include the foils, so I'm like right on that. And then 6 cold foil equipments beyond the legendary, so I feel really good about that as well. I did find a cold foil equipment when I was sorting the cards that I missed on the stream yesterday. I don't know how I did that, but just is what it is. So, anyways, we're gonna have Nick Conley on tonight.
Where is he?
I messaged him. He says he's ready, so I told him we would just lead in and then we'd be ready to go. So, what we'll do, Neil, is we'll join Nick in Game 1 on the Ashes Discord, and we'll mute our regular software and just bring in the Discord software.
See if it works.
Yeah, we're gonna. Everybody, just hold on to your butts, okay? Things may break, and if they do, I will get them fixed. I promise. So here we go. Hey, Nick. How are you tonight?
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Is my audio coming through okay?
I think so. Do you have your webcam on, by chance?
I don't, but I've been having a little bit of an internet connection issue,
Okay.
so I'm not sure I can.
We'll just leave it off, and we'll use just the 2-person without the guest. I just wanted to make sure if you wanted to be on cam with the stream, I had the guest overlays built for you. So
gotcha. Okay.
So welcome to the bus, man. Welcome back. Had you on last week for AshCon.
Thanks for having me again.
I feel like at this point we should just make you like the 3rd host. Just make it official. It's a 3-man show these days. That'd be fun. I'd be down with that.
Yeah, it's been super fun chatting with you guys and streaming. AshCon was a blast, and thanks so much for your help in providing coverage for that. It seemed like a lot of people really had a good time.
Oh yeah, man. There were so many cool games on AshCon last week. Like just so many cool games. So
I'm still losing my mind about that Red King Astria deck. I think that was just a masterpiece.
and Neil was on the Red King Noah deck that was played on day 3. I
Yeah,
think
it wasn't actually played by him, but it was one of his brews. I
Yeah.
actually played a couple games with him on Ashtek today, and we were talking about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I've heard a little bit of buzz around it, but I didn't see that game yet.
It's super cool.
It sounded like it did pretty good.
Yep, it's super
Nice.
cool. So
Nice.
yeah, I think that was the best part of all of that, was just seeing so many different takes on competitive Ashes, and getting a chance to see players of a variety of skill levels. Obviously, we had him on, but didn't know he was going to become the Shufflebus Season 4 champion, but he was day 1, so we definitely know we got to see some top level play from Inquisitor on day 1, and obviously Red King is an extremely great and top level competitor as well, top 8 Shufflebus competitor. We were kind of having like a proud Papa moment. I think it was Monday or Tuesday. It was just one of those things where like we were sitting there and we were looking at all of the pod winners, and there's 26 pods, and I think a pretty large chunk of them are Shufflebus competitors. So I was
a lot of familiar names.
Yeah, I was like sitting there and I'm like, well, that guy's been in Shufflebus, and and so it was super exciting to see that and know that our mission of creating a competitive environment for Ashes was coming to fruition, right? It was working, and
that experience is certainly paying off, and it's great to see so many of the same names and new names come up too, but just people regularly playing the game, and the game just keeps changing and getting more interesting, which is great to see.
That's a great segue we'll have to lead into with that tonight when we start talking about your experience in Shufflebus 4. I know Neil has got a few questions kind of pre-prep for you, and sure. I'm excited for you to get to approach those questions, but I'm also super excited to just kind of get your off the cuff reactions, because you sit in a really unique position when you play in something like this, right? Because not only do you get to see how the game maybe it plays differently than what it did in an old test environment, and I know it's hard to probably go back sometimes on that old test environment and remember exactly what it was like, but then you get to go, oh, like now I have to design stuff, and I have to think about that design in this scope, right? By like thinking about how competitive Ashes is played. Now it's going to definitely influence future design, I would think, in some capacity. So
I mean, they feel like two different metas to me, where it's like because the play testing cycle is full of us playing versions of the cards that don't see the light of day,
right? It's a very different experience all the way around.
Yeah, really, by the time I go back to a meta that we've done in playtesting and taking it from just a competitive lens, it feels very different. The cards kind of have a different just feeling to them, seeing them in the field. Like I'd say Turtle Guard is one that kind of stood out as like, I expect this one to be pretty good, and it's nice to see that one being played in good decks.
It's a great card.
Impossible Germans, Echo deck. Okay, so that defensive card works. It's getting played, and it's kind of doing what it does. So it's nice to see some of those ideas kind of be realized. But then also there's cards like Outmatch. Outmatch went through so many different changes and ended up on what looked really strong, but in practice is still a little bit difficult to wield. It could still just be that the time card pool isn't full enough for those options to really find their place, but it remains to be seen.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, Outmatch looks like a card that could be a blowout card, right? Like it looks like it's got that potential, and
it always feels like you're 2-for-1ing yourself.
Yeah,
and because in order for it to be like the best it can be, you have to be like spending some small guy you don't care very much about into their big guy, so you're trading with like
Yeah, and
guy on the board and a card in hand for their guy.
Yeah.
yeah, and especially in round 1, if you go second and they start with a knight and you can't really develop that Gilder book or Salamander, whatever you want to use outmatch on for decent value. You just can't get it set up enough in time, so it kind of failed on that point, but we see Backtrack coming up in the
Backtrack's gonna be so
trying
good.
Just
to
like a very similar card, but you trade 2 for 1, but you like don't trade the tempo.
You don't lose your board tempo, right? Your board presence, and that's a big value for Backtrack for sure. So, let's
definitely kind of a riff on the same idea.
So we were kind of shocked when you signed up for Shufflebus 4 because we've ran 4 seasons up to this point, and you've been very active in the community. I think that's one of the best parts about you in the Ashes community is that you are plugged in extremely well, and you're very communicative with the Ashes community, and I thank you for that and applaud you for that because that's an example of what you want to see from various developers, but we just don't always get that. And I think we lost Neil again here, but he's coming back now.
I'm here. Are
right.
you?
I'm back. I think we got you back.
Right.
So, but anyways, so what was it about 4 that was the magic number to get you to commit to that registration and really approach it? Was there a motivating factor on the back end for you, or was it just you just wanted to participate and had more time at this particular stage, of development or whatever?
Yeah.
What was
it? I felt like I had the time to participate if I wanted to, and kind of all the top level games were.
We lose Nick. We're having some internet issues. This is one thing I have a problem with Discord. Can you hear me, Neil? Yeah, you guys can still hear me, I'm assuming, right? But I think I've lost Neil. And
you don't always settle on just like, well, what's the best? What's good?
Nick, I think we lost Jesse or something.
Yeah, well, no, I lost you guys. Everybody can still hear me, but I lost you guys. So I don't know
I could hear Nick talking.
I couldn't hear Nick, and I don't know. Strange stuff going on with Discord here. So.
Yeah, Nick and I were
we try a reconnect?
Normally, but
this is so dramatic, Ben. there was a lot of insight right there, Ben, and we lost it all. So just where I lost you there, and that was that you had more time to commit to it last season, and that's then where you cut out. So I'll let you see if you can pick up from there, and we'll see if we can keep our connection.
Sure. Yeah, well, it was great seeing just all the content coming out. I was really enjoying watching the top level games, and definitely miss competing myself, and this really seemed to be the place to do it. And I have a lot of friends that I've made from 1.0 that are still playing the game now, just staying in discussion with them. It's like, I just want to be competing again, and it's you don't always have the same goals when playtesting, where we're exploring new areas with new cards that never see the light of day, and but going back to that guaranteed meta and just trying the best there, it's a little bit hard to have enough playtest time to spend a lot in there, so kind of playing the game with what's current is a good way to really understand what the game needs in the future, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic place to be as a designer, is to get an opportunity to play at the highest levels. And obviously, you found great success in Season 4, getting yourself into a top 4 position. Shows your skills are not rusty. just coming out of the gate and just being like, I'll show you all how to play this game. Let me beat you all. and you did a great job of that through the whole season. We watched you
Thanks,
work your way into, I think, did you go fully undefeated in Swiss, or did you get to round 6 and then lose? Is that, I think it was somewhere
I
in there.
lost in round 5 to Kakamele's James.
Yeah, that list was awesome, by the way. That I just
I mean, that was the game that like really just inspired me to make some tweaks to the deck, and like I felt like it just completely exposed my deck's weakness, and I hadn't run up to that yet, so it was a good experience to see it just pick me apart. And like I felt it coming when I was preparing for that game too. I was like, I don't think I can respond to Widows like at all. And then they just came down like round 1, round 2, round 3, and I'm like, I was right, and it's terrible. The Widows are so painful.
And we didn't get to watch that. I don't think we got to watch that game on stream. That was one that was played offline from our coverage. But I heard the stories of it, and I think a lot of decks would have a hard time with round 1, round 2, round 3 Widows, right? Like that's just a lot of tempo. When your deck is doing that already. And then, maybe there are ways to respond to it, of course, but that's still just a lot of tempo to fight through. You have to also be drawing the answers on the same tempo and the same timing, and that can be difficult. So, but anyways, so you made yourself well known in the community and the competitive community, getting into that top 8 slot in your first season out, and I don't think any of us doubted that. I mean, I think there was some predictions from Kaya, if I remember right, and Kaya was like, "Here's my prediction: a rookie is gonna win it, and my vote is on Nick."
Yeah, not maybe exactly.
No, I thought it was pretty funny, and I think he kind of became the people's champion for that prediction at that point, just for that purpose alone.
My answer to that when we talked about it on stream prior to the season was like, that's like calling Tom Brady a rookie just because he moved to Tampa Bay last year.
It's so true. but yeah, so we, obviously, was fun to watch you bring Jessa, and obviously lots of people brought Jessa to Shufflebus 4.
Yeah, it was fun to be in the season of Jessa. It was fun chatting with everybody about Jessa as a Phoenixborn, and just she hasn't seen a ton of play in Shufflebus past, if I recall correctly. So it was a good time.
We only had a couple, I think. Maybe maybe none. Do we have any?
No, we've not had a Jessa represented up to this point in Shufflebus until season 4. So that's why we
nobody played a single Jessa.
Oh, she's not been
Oh
present.
my goodness!
This is a thing that happens in
This
is a thing that happens in Shufflebus tournaments. It's kind of weird. Where it and Ben kind of talked about. Oh, Brian did play one in season 1. I don't remember that. Carl, great memory if that's true. I didn't remember that. I thought Brian was on something else. But okay, so we had one. But yeah, I found it interesting because like we see this a lot in Shufflebus tournaments where like certain sort of like the community sort of ebbs and flows into certain Phoenixborns, and then all of a sudden Shufflebus is like loaded up with that Phoenixborn. We've seen that happen at least twice, maybe 3 times. Because one of them was season 2 with Harold.
You can definitely just see people like we finished season 1, so then season 2 had a bunch of Harold, right?
Yeah.
We finished season 2, and then season 3 had a bunch of Brennan and Namin burn decks, right?
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah.
It was kind of like it just shows that the community like responds to the results from the previous one, which they should.
Yeah.
Especially like it's a little different going to season 5 because we're adding 20 cards to the pool, but in the previous seasons, one of the times we had a Jericho, but the card pool stayed very, very much the same, and you just see people like, well, the Knights and Snakes did really well in season 1, so everybody wants to play Herald in season 2, and then these control decks did well in season 2, so we're going to play Burn in season 3, and that's so it was weird to see like 7 Jesses out of nowhere,
right?
But the community as a whole, like, they want to adapt, and I think it's just natural for people not to want to play the same thing again.
Yeah, totally.
So as we have maybe one Jessa out of 60, 70 decks or whatever for 3 seasons, then odds are that we become more targeted at a Phoenixborn like that in an upcoming season, just because people want to play new stuff.
Yeah. So I think like when you look at it, and Nick, you did an extensive write up on your Jessa and
really
experience.
Great. Anybody that hasn't read that should go read it.
And if you go out to Ashes Live, I think your deck was just recently published, but otherwise just search by Jessa over here, and then you're just looking, Fear the Hunt, SB4, top 4. And then in the description, there's a Google Doc here, and this is Nick's complete write-up of every match, his first 5 decisions, how the match played out, how many times he screamed, which was something we asked Nick to do, was like track the screams. And
that's going to be a topic of conversation at some point.
Yeah, so we will get to that. We can probably segue into that pretty quickly here, but and I just appreciate this, man. Like, this is, I mean, it's like a glimpse inside the mind of a very, very good player, and it's difficult to get that always from the community, because it takes a ton of work. I mean, this was probably, I know how long this would have taken to write.
It's a long document.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the culmination of all my notes from playing in the season, which lasts a while. So kind of like week at a time, I go into my journal and just kind of talk about what I'm thinking for round 1, and
I link the doc in chat for anybody that's here in chat, so you guys can go to it and save it for a reading later. I highly recommend you go read this, because there's a lot of data here, and there's a lot of insight that can be gleaned from it. And so I even took things away from it. Sometimes when you play a lot of Ashes, you get fixated on certain lines of thinking, and I'll honestly tell you that, like, as I read your experiences, I was like, I hadn't considered that as a potential line in a couple of occasions here. And it changes the way you think about things. So I think that's a positive for any player at any skill level, right? Like, I think that's a real positive. Cool. So thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Kind of valuable. Yeah, thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, so Neil, you want to talk about Screams? You want to jump right in there, or do you want to jump in somewhere else?
Yeah, kind of about Jess as a whole, but
okay. Yeah, let's just go there.
Scream is obviously a large part of that, because I spent a lot of the season talking about how that ability, like, at the beginning, how much I hated that ability, and how much I still kind of don't like it, but I hopefully have a better understanding of it now than at the beginning of the season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to start, like, obviously everybody was really high on Jessa. Everybody, there were 7 of them going in. We had 2 make the top 8, both of which I played against 2 different versions of it. I played against a deck kind of like yours, that was kind of like an aggressive deck. It had a bunch of knights. And then I played against one other version that was like all chump blockers. It was like,
oh, cool.
It was just like Salamander Monk and Risen Horde and just like small men. Mm-hmm. And I was unprepared for like how that game actually played. And it went a long time, and I eventually lost, because there was just like a turn where he gained 6 life and killed my Frostback Bears. But I think that's like more on me than anything else. Just like not playing around the guild link correctly. I don't know. That's either here or there.
But, yeah.
In general, like, I think everybody can agree that Fear is an insane card, right? Like, and your deck powerful. Specifically, with the Huntmaster, like, you, like, all the games that I commentated that I was there, you first 5 the Huntmaster.
Yeah, I mean that
is
was
that like
the
an auto first five? I know you talked about it some in your write up, but was there any matchup where you didn't first five the Huntmaster?
So the one game I didn't was in top 4 against Inquisitor. I can't recall all the details on why I settled on the first 5 I did for that one, but I think it was mainly because that was, I think, one of the first Golden Veils that I encountered, and I thought it would be in the first 5, and it was. So immediately, like, I don't know if I'm going to be even playing Fear in round 1 there, and I didn't, so we just kind of like held on to this, and uh, ultimately, Jessen needs those fears to go off well to succeed. So even just the threat of the Golden Veil is just preventing Jessen from doing.
I guess I
first
do
strikes
remember
things.
that being on stream because it was one of the top 8 matches, and you
Well, it was the top 4. Yeah.
right, and it became very clear at the end of round 1 that you had the fear and he had the Golden Veil, and they just kind of like stared at each other, and that happened for round 2 also.
Yes,
And
yes, it did.
at a, at a certain point, like you have to run something into it, right? Like I
yeah,
don't.
and
I was
maybe the
trying to
play was to
analyze.
just
Oh, go
do
ahead.
it in round 1.
That's
And pull the
more
Golden
dice
Veil out.
efficient for both of you. I don't know which deck that is better
Yeah, I
for.
don't know who it favors, and it
Because
kind of demands another fear in round 2 to keep fighting back in time. But
right. But
yeah,
your deck
aside from
had
the
the 9
Golden
removal
Veil,
spells, and
mhm.
uh, I think you only had the 1 GB. But yeah, it was just kind of like a weird standoff, and it puts you like, I not you specifically, but just like puts either player in this weird thing where uh, you're just kind of like both playing first fours, like 9
And
dice.
playing 4 cards in round 2, and for however
Yeah.
long you
It's
want to
kind
stand
of
off on it.
honestly a lot how combat felt in Ashes 1.0. The first person to make the move is maybe
Right,
disadvantaged, and nobody really knows if it's worth it to do it at all.
right, and you have like a small advantage because you're the only one in the driver's seat there. Like he can't like GV you to make you fear. It's only goes one way, but
Yeah.
that was a weird situation.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
thought spending 10 dice and maybe stranding the GV would help, because then I'd have 10 to 9 dice in round 1. So, oh, maybe that'll work out. And my first 5 still let me have fear in my hand, but I still
right.
spent 10 dice on other stuff. So I was like, oh, maybe if I get up a die there and have the fear and maybe draw another one for round 2, I can start slamming them down. But didn't really happen that
Yeah,
way. Inquisitor's
Golden
deck's
Veil.
certainly very good.
Obviously, like fear, like I said, insane, super good. Like like obviously the biggest reason to play Jessup, but um, it is a card that like gets you like it might be like the worst of any card, except for maybe like Phoenix Barrage now, but that gets just eaten up by a Golden Veil.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Phoenix Barrage would be. Yeah, it's a
Like
rough one to get canceled for sure.
yeah,
But yeah, Fear Sim.
it's just like the
Sacrifice
dice
that upfront cost.
differential. And GV creates like a huge dice differential against everything, and it also creates a huge tempo differential because you've spent your probably one main and at least one dice to make a unit, and then one main and one dice to play your fear. And obviously, you can mitigate the first half of that a little bit, like you did with the Huntmaster. So you're spending like a quarter of a card instead of a whole card or whatever. But it's just a
Yeah.
ton
Oh
of
yeah,
time
we were
and
talking
effort.
about Huntmaster. Huntmaster plus Fear. Yeah, so it was definitely a first 5 card in every other game I played. That was kind of the concept I built the deck around, because I wanted to optimize Fear in round 1, which can be a little tricky to do given its sacrifice cost. But yeah, I settled on Huntmaster as a very sneaky way to not pay that sacrifice cost very much, given that the Panther is fleeting. You get 2 units right away, so even if you go first, Fear is immediately a threat. If they try to play a blocker ally or something, you can sacrifice right away, which I really valued going first in my games because of that.
Right. You turn off like the like turn 1 Grave Knight kind of stuff. There's like the big powerful start. I mean, you're kind of doing the same thing by deploying a 3 dice unit to turn 1, but yeah, I thought it was really cool, and it just your deck was so lean, in spite of having the 10 knights or whatever, or 7 knights, because you had the full set of hammers and the full set of vampires, and the 1 Huntmaster, obviously.
Yep, that was it for allies.
Oh, and that was literally all of them.
Yep.
I didn't run any small allies. I do want to squeeze a Crimson Bomber in, though. That was kind of what I picked up after my game against Kakamele's James. I brought Ping Fester, and that didn't work out. So another 2-die option was really needed for that first 5 variation I was going for, and Crimson Bomber would have slotted right in. It's got the ability to be kind of like a Mist Typhoon.
I've actually
don't want to do the
Bomber a few times in the last couple weeks as a card that has grown on me a lot. He's just like a good pile of stats with relevant text. And
there's not a lot of units that are in that cost slot and are just like 3/2s.
Right. So
what's interesting about I was going to say what was interesting about this decision that you're talking about adding Bomber in, the 2 class die, those double class die. There's a lot of those kinds of cards. I'm finding, and I did this with my version of Odette for Ashcon, I added a Frostfang, and very similar reason, because there was just a flex first 5 where I didn't necessarily want to start a knight, and I still wanted to build a reasonable threat. Now, I wasn't on 4 Ceremonial in that deck to be able to go into the Crimson Bomber. If I was on 4 Ceremonial, I'd probably have picked Bomber over Frostfang.
Very similar, though.
But it's a very similar stat line, very similar sort of ability overall in terms of like...
Yeah, its role that it's playing is good. Yeah, those first 5 cost differences I've found to just be so important, and lacking a 2 cost option definitely impacted my ability to pick a first 5 that I was happy with.
And I'm leaning a lot more into Ironworker in that spot too. It's
that's a great one that can just kind of go anywhere.
Because then you can be flexible in what you spend your dice on, right? Because Ironworker with the basic cost. So I do think there's a lot of room for these 2 cost allies in these decks, because to your point, we see a lot of similar lines in competitive decks where there's a knight and then 7 other dice worth of cards somewhere, and it means that it's really easy. Well, not really easy. I mean, there's still a guessing game involved, but it's really easy to start a single removal spell in your first 5 and be able to take care of their biggest and largest threat. But it's a lot less clear if that's the best thing to do when that's a 2 dice threat instead of a 3 dice threat. And Crimson Bomber,
it's in that medium space where you're like,
it just doesn't feel as good, right?
Some small things can trade up into it, like a 2/1 beats a 3/2, and you're like, oh yeah, that's great. Or like Odette hitting a Crimson, and you take a lot of damage back, but hey, I cleared it at least.
I mean, that's
like the biggest dice differential ever if you enter the fray. That's
that's what I did to Carl's, Carl's Frostfang in season 3. He played the Frostfang, and I just took the 3 damage from the Frostfang to kill the Frostfang on Enter the Fray. So you just have to know when that makes sense when you have something like Odette on board. But Aerodel would do the same thing with Water Blast, right? And so you kind of, I do like these units for that reason, but they may not be the best units against Odette and Aerodel, but that's only 2 Phoenixborns, and to be honest, they're not widely played for whatever reason.
I mean, that card slot has its weaknesses, just kind of like every other card slot has its weakness. The small stuff is weaker to AoE, the big stuff is weaker to single target removal. There's... And 2 cost units kind of have my attention in terms of design. I think more 2 cost allies and 2 cost or like dual cost books are really interesting cards that give different first 5 textures from kind of the traditional stuff we see. Knights, of course, play a very important for the game, and there will be more knights. There probably won't ever be a knight for every combination because it's good to change things up a little bit, but there's certainly a temptation in every deck to be like, ooh, what would the knight be?
I totally get that. I mean,
sometimes it comes to life, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think the perfect example of that, honestly, is Standard Bearer. Standard Bearer is a great 2-cost out.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily super powerful on its own. It certainly plays very differently than the other 2 costs we were just talking about, like Crimson and Frostfang. But it adds real value and it creates a real threat. And it isn't even like I've been playing it. I've been playing in decks that aren't even trying to go super wide because a lot of times it's only buffing 1 or 2 units anyways, right? So you can play that alongside a variety of different units to get value out of that ability off of the Standard Bearer.
Yeah, but I think it slots into any 2-cost slot if you're doing like a Fighting Spirit deck or something, like anything just a little bit status tokeny since it comes preloaded and more status matters with it. It's like, yeah, that totally can fit into first 5.
The more recent like 2-cost guys they're like a lot more build around me's, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we were talking about Frostfang or Crimson Bomber or I don't know, Beast Tamer, as guys that are like
quite a lot now,
just like good on their own and essentially like the same value at any time you draw them throughout the game. Well, I think the new 3/1/3s are very good and powerful. Like they don't have that same resiliency where like if you just draw Standard Bearer into an open board, it's like a fine play, but you're not super excited about it. Same with Shepherd. Both cards I think are very good and like do what you want them to do, but they're kind of like I want to play like 1 Frostfang or 1 Crimson Bomber for kind of what you were saying is like have a first 5 option at 2 that's flexible, but also like if I draw it in round 2 or 3, I'm not upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a fine body, but yeah,
that's like not really
Standard
what
Bearer is one that I see happen
Standard
a lot.
Bearer is. Yeah.
Well, let's specifically pivot away unless you got more on Jessa you want to talk about.
I want to talk about Screams, and I want to talk about another thing from our tournament that Nick and I talked about offline already, but specifically came up to me just as things go. So as far as the Screams go, at the beginning of the season, I was pretty much like, this ability is very bad. And I didn't have a lot of experience with it. I was just trying to analyze it in a way that made sense to me. And it just never did, right? Like, and as you look at your games on that chart, there were 2 games where you screamed in round 1. And in those 2 games, like, something went wrong, right? Like, you didn't plan to scream in round 1.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's why it always seems so bad to me. Like, it just, like, I don't want to play 9 dice to your 10. And given the opportunity, I would pay a life to take one of your dice away at essentially any time in the game almost.
Well, that's the thing. The time you wouldn't want to do it is the time where it's really good, and that's at the end of the game when you're okay, it's time to burn and win. It's really bad at the start of the game, and I think the technique of Screams and what makes it so interesting to me is you have to constantly be evaluating, is Screams worth a die right now or not? And I write a lot about that where it's like you have to kind of audit your hand and know what you're going to be spending, what you're going to have battlefield space for, what's your priority right now to prevent your opponent from getting further ahead to where they'll beat you on the battlefield and Screams can't close the game. So you got to keep the opponent away from killing you, and then you enter that stage of the game where Screams is just that sinister inevitability and you're at too high of a life advantage for them to swing through before you can just block and scream them to death. And while it's not Water Blast where it's like I want to use this every round, It's that repeatability that makes you want to shove it towards the end of the game. When you know there's always a point where spending a die to deal 1 damage is worth it, and that value increases the closer you are to the end. So you don't need to build burn cards into your deck. It really opens it up. And Final Cry is the card in my deck. I had them like, oh, this might be nice if I'm like using fear and sacrifice.
Yeah, I watched you discard that Final Cry to Owls a bunch of times, and I'm like, yeah, that's the worst card in his hand.
Yeah, like by
it
far.
Just has to be. Like it couldn't be close.
And so it's a little bit more damage for a die than Screams is, but the windows in which Screams is good, Final Cry is good. The windows where Screams is bad, you're not going to Final Cry either. So just having a card rotting in your hand and not allowing you to spend dice on better things just puts you back every time you draw it.
Specifically, like under the gun of the Owl, which we saw a lot of in this tournament, like you're just going to discard your worst card, and you would be much happier screaming them and discarding a Final Cry and keeping your good cards than like trying to get 1 extra damage out of your dice and discard something that is important to your plan.
Yep.
So I did come around to Scream as the tournament went on and we watched more of these games, and my analysis of it kind of changed to like Screams of the Departed feels like she just has like the card Anguish printed on her, where it's so bad at the beginning of the game, because at the beginning of the game the onus is on you to do stuff, and your opponent can just be like, well, I you play Anguish, I take 4 and you've done nothing, and you're down a card and some dice in the first 5 or in round 2 to your opponent putting pressure on you.
Yeah, and the resources in the game change value over time as the game goes through different stages of what's most important. Yeah, of course, Battlefield is super important round 1. If you don't respect it, you get blown out in round 2 sometimes if you really face an aggressive opponent. So yeah, the focus really changes over the pacing of the game, and similarly, I think the value of Burn and Screams and Anguish similarly.
The biggest thing that happens as you like move to untap step to start the next round, when you scream or you play cards that don't play to the battlefield, you do things that don't change like the pressure that way.
Mm-hmm.
You pay for it in the following round, except for the round when they die.
Yes, exactly.
And your chart does a good job of showing it here in game 1, 2, and 3 there, where like you obviously put the pressure on of the Screams in the later part of the game, where you don't pay for that disadvantage as much, because even in the round, like in game 3, you see you did it 3 times in round 3, and the game obviously played to round 4. You may have lost a lot of battlefield pressure there, but because you know that in the first couple turns of round 4 you get to scream through more times and kill them, you're not in debt the differential.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Like you don't have to make that up, because all that goes like essentially by doing the last point of damage, you kill all their stuff anyway. So I came around to it, and that was kind of my example of it. And to your point about auditing your hand, I think that's a good way to put it, where a lot of round 2 hands probably are very easy to figure out when you're supposed to scream. I think Scream is one of the most difficult abilities in the game to play correctly, but in general, like if you look at your hand and you look at your books in play and you just say like, oh, I have 9 dice worth of stuff to do this turn, I get to scream once, like that's easy, right? That will always be easy.
Sure,
but
yep.
Calling it an audit is like the perfect word for it, where you really have to value like what you're actually going to do, and Screams as a pseudo reaction is kind of a weird thing, because you could end up with a like a Fate Reflection or a Golden Veil, something like that, like a reaction in your hand that you have 1 dice left.
Yeah.
And they're going to kill your guy. I guess not with damage in this example, if it's a fate reflection or whatever, because you would pretty much always do that. But some reaction that you're holding this dice for, and you know that the round is going to go still
maybe battle
like several more turns, and you have to decide like this may be your only chance to scream, but you may have chance for whatever reaction in 2 actions from now. And that's I think that is the difficult part of playing it, right? Like
yeah, those are the moments that come up, and it's like you don't want to miss your chance, because if Screams is worth it right now, you don't have infinite opportunities to do it. So a lot of time is spent just sitting and thinking, being like, do I scream this time? Is this one? It's not. No.
I guess.
But there's oftentimes like a switch that'll flip.
Right.
Where you're like, oh, Screams is a high priority right now. And it's not always that dramatic to be a single moment where you're like, now I'm screaming. Because it depends on what is in the rest of your hand. So like my game 6 against Phil, round 2 I screamed 3 times, and that was the round I screamed the most. It was just like what made sense with my hand. Yeah, it's like I typically don't want to scream that much that early, but it was the best thing I could do. And I ended that round with like a very high life differential. So I was like, cool, a few more attacks, a few more screams. This is actually worth it. And unlike Harold or James, the 2 Phoenixborn that I lost against this round, other Jesses don't have a big battlefield, so they can't punish falling behind on battlefield as much. So it was like, oh, actually looks like screaming against another Jessa might be more valuable sooner, because they can't build up a 6-wide board and you got Raptor in there and they get a top around swing and you're like, shoot, like I can't block all of that. If it's just another Jessa and you're both kind of hanging around that full battlefield space, go for the screens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and looking at specifically the thing I find most interesting here is your top 8 games. Mm-hmm. Because you're playing control matchups in these top 8 games. And what your data shows here, and you kind of have to like think about it to get there. You know, you think in like the slower control games that screens would be good, but in actuality it's the opposite, where you guys are both just grinding every ounce of value out of your cards that you just can't afford to throw a dice away.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. The battlefield was just so hotly contested and important for the matchup that there's just no room not to put all the effort into that. And like I kind of didn't even count my screams very good against Inquisitor there. It was kind of towards the point of the game where I saw it slipping away. I was like, and I just have to go with these last kind of screams that I can maybe do in those rounds. But yeah, it was tough because it was like I am falling behind. I can't start screaming yet. And yeah, it shows with the numbers there.
So for, I guess, the big final question about all of this is, where do you rank Screams of the Departed? Like, and it doesn't be a literal rank, but just like compared to other Phoenixborn text, like where do you think this ability is on power level?
I think it's a bit hard to just compare it straight to other abilities. The Phoenixborn is kind of the whole package.
Yeah.
But I think Screams offers a lot. It made up about 12% of my dice spending throughout the whole tournament is what I averaged it to. And that's a sizable chunk, I think. And the ability to build a deck without that burn avenue needing to be respected, I think is really cool. It lets me focus all in on just summoning great units, playing great removal spells, and kind of patching up some longevity things with Magic Siphon and Butterfly Monk. And I don't need those final cries. I didn't want those. I'd rather them have just been more units and more removal, because Like every time I drew one, I was like, this is a bit of a bummer. Magic Siphon was kind of a similar thing where it's like, this is not the card I really want early. It's more to stop things from getting bad towards the end of the game. But even so, Magic Siphon still felt useful enough and necessary.
Yeah, and my question is, I have a question more related to Magic Siphon. I think there's a general consensus within the community that Magic Siphon can be used as a mill pivot through the spin down of the Magic Siphon. And we saw Brian B commit to that in the finals against Inquisitor, who had Mindfog Owl, or Three-Eyed Owl. And Brian was ahead on cards in
This was literally like my next point I wanted to ask him about.
Sure. So I'm glad we're on the same page about this.
Let's talk Magic Siphon.
Yeah, let's talk about this card and its position in the meta. Is it really doing what the community thinks it's doing? I mean, or is it just a perception because you're already ahead and then play it? Is it actually, I mean, maybe it works when your opponent isn't on their own mill plan as well, even if it is a very slow, grindy mill plan, like what we saw Jason do in the finals with the Owls. But I would love to get your thoughts on Magic Siphon across the tournament, and whether or not it actually did it enable you to come from behind in any situations, or was it just a win more? Because I'm starting to lean more towards the win more on it. I'm not 100% on that side of it yet, but I'm just not sure it's actually doing what some people think it's doing.
The one thing I will say about it real quick before we go to that question is Magic Siphon, I think, still does the other thing that we think it does, which is fight reactions. And I don't think it's first fiveable to do that.
Right.
Because it's such a low impact. But if you have them in your deck, especially going into a meta where everybody loves Fate Reflection, like, it does do that. Like, spin down on your opponent's snake or the turtle or whatever for the reaction play. It does do that. The question that we had, and obviously you and I talked about this already offline, Nick, is how does it affect this long control matchup?
So it's a weird situation that Brian had the siphons but still got decked sooner, right? That's kind of the mystery to be solved, at least in this matchup there. And one thing that a couple things that came to mind was just looking at the rest of the spell boards here. And it could be that with only 3 spell board, Herald, Brian's Herald didn't have enough spell books to continually invest dice in this renewable resource. Magic Siphon is renewable itself, but what it contributes to the game could arguably be considered not as impactful as just like dropping down more owls, and owls also doing this hand pressure.
Right. I mean, I think we can all agree that Owl is better at milling than Magic Siphon. But
yeah.
And Carl says this in chat. He says, I think the final game is the exception, not the rule. The reason is that they were both close to milling, so they didn't want to spend cards from hand as much. So the dice faces weren't as important. Owl much more important there. He said he thinks that Brian should have ditched Salamander Monk Book instead of ditching Owl to play his Magic Siphons.
Yeah, I can totally see that being viable.
And I agree with that. I mean, at the time in the game that he switched to Magic Siphon, we weren't like... It wasn't... I still think that Brian was trying to win the old-fashioned way through the battlefield. Like, it looked that way the way he was playing. And Inquisitor, as he had done in the last 2 matches we had watched Inquisitor play, just went full in on Activate Owl as much as possible for the remainder of the game. And it just, from my point of view, it's not so much that like Owl is better than it, because obviously Owl mills you better than Magic Siphon, because Magic Siphon is like maybe mill you 1 every 2 times you activate it. Like,
Owl just does
it just depends on, like, you have no control over whether it actually mills them. whereas Owl just mills 1 every time you activate it. So I think that's pretty obvious. It's just, it feels like the finals of our tournament should have been the ideal situation for a Magic Siphon to be good, where it was 2 control decks bashing into each other, and I guess not bashing into each other, just 2 control decks grinding away for 6 or 7 rounds or whatever, so you get a ton of activations of it. He had it pretty early in the game, and he was still the one that got decked.
Mm-hmm.
And
and there's a lot of other data points that contribute to this. We don't know how many basic player had rolled in each round, or at least I don't. So it could be that Brian just naturally had to meditate more based on dice roll variance there. Jason also had basic costs on Frostback Bear and Mindfog Owl.
And that's a great point that you had brought up when we were talking offline, is the basic costs in his books.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that is a lot more impactful than I thought it would be. Yeah.
And 1-die conjurations can never spend basic. they just can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. I do think that it's great at fighting reactions. And I suppose there is a moment in time in many games where if your opponent doesn't have their own mill plan, then you can really punish their mill plan, right? Like there's non-primary win.
Right. It will never actually mill them. What it will do is it'll stop them from playing cards when they get down to no cards in pile.
Right.
And that's about as good, right? Like in these control matchups. I have no issue with what Magic Siphon actually does. What I'm afraid is that, myself included, because I really was kind of on this same thing where I'm like, yeah, Magic Siphon's good to have 2 or 3 copies in my deck to draw later in these control matchups. But I'm no longer sure that that's right. And it's not that it's wrong, but just that if in that situation, in the finals that we watched, in a game that went many, many rounds, we got many activations of Magic Siphon, and I'm playing the Magic Siphon and I'm the one that gets fatigued out, is this really the pivot plan that I want? Because I assume that is the matchup you want that for. I assume that that's the ideal situation for that card. And
it could very well just be that summoning units is more important, and going down to 2 books versus 3 very efficient books for the long game. Your total ability to play for the long game goes down. So Magic Siphon doesn't contribute anymore to that.
So my question, I guess, is not so much like what does Magic Siphon do? It's like, is this plan in these grindy control matchups, should it be Magic Siphon, or should it be like should I just have some copies of, I don't know, like Abundance or Ash Spirit Book or like some other thing that's like good when the game goes long, but actually kills them, like Orchid Dove, something like that.
Yeah, and I think
obviously those things are more targeted than Magic Siphon, because Magic Siphon may do something in other matchups, but
yeah, there's ways to play certain cards incorrectly, and there's ways to play them to the best of their ability, and there could be some misconceptions on Magic Siphon. One thing that it did really well for, the thing we acknowledged right away, was the disruption side of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my game 2 against BD Wayne, I just kept spinning down Divine Dice to stop the Meteor, because a Meteor was
I
really
remember commentating that game. Yeah, and he did it like that was like 4 times. He just meditated and passed into your Magic Siphon because he couldn't do anything else.
I've gone back and reviewed that game because that was an interesting game. Because I think BD Wayne's deck was actually favored in that matchup, to be honest. And I
made a couple pretty big misplays too. I think
I just think, like, bottom line is, like, that particular game, BD Wayne had, in my opinion, the best way to protect his life and drag the game on, and create the favorable position because of the Leo having 6 battlefield, and that really just involved the recursion of Law of Grace. Is it Law of Grace? Is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah, I was really
Law of Grace is the one that blocks
the one damage because it turned the screams off, right?
Screams.
Yeah, so I was like sitting there, and he had.
Yeah, I remember being very
law.
afraid of that card.
Yeah, he played it once, and then he ended up. I think his biggest misplay in that whole game, and trust me, this is not a. I'm not sure I would have seen it in game either, but when you go back and review tape and you watch these things and know the outcomes and have hindsight, you can make analysis like this. So, was that he tried to bring back a Majestic Titan, and never played the Titan book after that. And I think
is what you're talking about
with the Essence Druid, yeah, because he could have brought the Law of Grace back there. It was in his discard pile, and it was from the previous round. So in fact, I made a small comment about it because when he played the Druid, I said I bet he gets Law of Grace, and he got the Titan instead. And so I don't know what
round was that.
It's like round 3.
I want to say Law of Grace went down round 3.
I thought he went down 2.
Oh, sorry. What round of the tournament did you play BD Wayne? Is what I was asking.
That was
game
probably
2.
Game 2, yeah. So it was a lesser scream game, anyways. But
right, that was just what I wanted to check how much it would have actually blocked.
Yeah, I mean in that game, Nick didn't scream very much, but I'm pretty sure Law of Grace either came down round 2 or round 3, which is why round 3 doesn't have a big scream output. And round 4, it only took the 2 screams to get you there to finish the game. So I think, when you look at that game in particular, I actually think that BD Wayne's deck was built in a great way to compete with Jessa. And I don't know what the actual. I mean, we'd have to play 100 games to figure out who's actually favored, right? But in my mind, in a vacuum, looking at the 2 lists, that was what I saw as being the potential bugaboo for Jessa in the format. Yeah, I don't know how many times BD Wayne played Jessa, and if you learn from it in future rounds and use Law of Grace on loop against Jessa to win closeout games. I really don't know the rest of his tournament. Maybe
I don't remember that game specifically.
It was our first. It was our first. Yeah, it was our first feature match.
Okay, but in a vacuum, and I don't remember BD Wayne's deck either. Obviously, Law of Grace is good against the screams half of Jessa, but Majestic Titan as a card doesn't seem very good against Fear, and particularly good against this version of Jessa that has the 3 Festers and 3 Bloodchains also.
So that was where I was going with it from that perspective of just saying, I think I'd love to get Nick's thoughts. How much did you run up against Law of Grace at all? I mean, because it's not a card we see a lot of.
I think that was the only game that I faced it.
I think that's it's interesting. These laws are tech options, right? They're Law of Fear, Law of Grace. They're tech cards for specific matchups, but sometimes it's pretty hard to figure out how to slot them efficiently because they're not necessarily great in first fives, right? They're not necessarily great first fiveable cards.
It's Law of Grace definitely isn't a great first 5 card, I don't think.
It's only good against Brennan. I think Brennan does a lot of burning in first 5.
But what happens in a Brennan? It blocks 2 damage, you still take 2. Yeah, I'm assuming that includes a Final Cry into zone ability. That doesn't seem great for 1 dice to me.
No, it blocks.
You also want to get value out of the healing when you play it.
So you get a life back.
One of the things
I don't know that 1 dice gain 3 is good enough.
Well, I mean, that can't be true because 1 dice gain 2 is good enough. Heal's good enough.
Correct. Later I'm talking about first 5 specifically.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's what I said. I mean, to my first point here in this conversation was that these cards don't feel great as first 5s. They feel much better in later rounds, and that makes them tough because you don't necessarily want these tech options as 3 of slots. So I think that kind of keeps them in check to a certain degree. But I'm just wondering, in your mind, outside of traditional plays that you've talked about, like the Kakamele deck, excuse me. Just being able to go wider than you and really pressure the board. What would be, would a Law of Grace, and a looping Law of Grace off Essence Druid would be the kind of thing that would really just shut you down. Do you think the Jessa list can power through that in a vacuum? I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that can change that, but I mean, just in a general.
It depends how stable. Depends how stable they are on the battlefield, I would say, because my deck is also a swing deck.
Mm-hmm.
It tries to force Phoenixborn Guards and get bears through, just like any other aggro deck does. So, Screams is only making up a percentage of what I'm spending dice on, rather, it's only a small percentage of how much Phoenixborn damage gets done. Like, it ranged from like 4 to 7 in my games, I think.
Right.
Obviously, the rest of that damage has to come from somewhere. So, Law of Grace, it prevents the option for Screams, but it doesn't affect spending. And if I can still spend dice to deal damage by attacking, or at least progress and keep up on the battlefield, then there's a chance it doesn't fully shut down Jessa. But if I'm like out of dice, or like out of cards, can't really meditate, can't summon things, and a Law of Grace comes down, it's like, oh man, when Screams is really the only option and it gets shut out, then you're struggling.
That's the real question, though, right? If you look at this chart, assuming all things equal, the most it would have gained was 4 life in 5 specific rounds.
If you look at it as an average across 8 games, it's about 4 1/4. It's
no, because it only stays for 1 round. So
sure,
like it'll block 3 damage in the rounds he did it 3 times, and it gains him 1, so that's a gain 4. Now that's only a gain 4 if he literally has nothing else to do with those 3 dice.
Agreed.
So if he plays any cards, then all of a sudden it's way worse than a gain 4. So and what Nick you just said is absolutely perfect. Where like if you can't play cards, if you can't summon things, if you need to meditate a lot, does the Law of Grace, is that really the last nail, or you already lost?
It's kind of like Noah's shadow target too. It's like you pay to stop a particular line, but it doesn't affect what they actually spend. It just depends how much they needed that one option. And like game 6 again, game 6 round 2, when my hand was super light and I just started screaming, maybe I would have had to go to like dice powers or whatever to round out spending that round.
And I think probably the better answer, the more proactive answer than Law of Grace, just personally, and probably more efficient in color, is Choke, right? Choke and Choke's just got more play across a wider swath of Phoenixborns, right? So
against Jessa, it's essentially the same card. It does a damage instead of gaining a life.
Right.
Upon doesn't take your spell board.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's a
good
big
one.
part. So I mean, that was kind of where I was like I played Cole against Chaos Theory's Jessa, and it's a very different Jessa than yours. His was very much about sort of creating this wall of units that you're not going to be able to get around, right? And all of those units extend Jessa's life pool through sustain, so it's Pain Shamans and Butterfly Monks and heals. I mean, every heal card you can imagine was in this deck, right? And it effectively gives Jessa like some effective life pool around like 20, probably 24-ish, 25-ish in most matches would be my guess. The way our match played out, if that was consistent, and that's hard to beat no matter what you do, right?
Yeah.
But he also was playing Choke, and obviously Choke is very powerful against Cole. So. But I also kind of looked at it in a vacuum and said, well, Choke's very powerful against Jessa as well, because his plan was very much to surrender as many of his units as possible, whether that's through combat, and use his dice effectively to fear you, or to scream you.
So in the chump blocky versions of the Jessa decks that I saw, they obviously want to scream aggressively, and then Choke is much better.
Yeah.
But against, I'll just make the same point against Nick's version, like the most it does is gain 3 life.
Yeah, but I mean, gaining 3 for a lot of Phoenixborns is, I mean, it's in the realm of like 20 to 25% of some of the Phoenixborns' life.
But well, not
like
25. Let's take game 6 round 2. the one that he said went really bad and didn't have anything else to do with his dice, like then it's probably really good. But it's not just game 3. So I'm playing a card that is deal damage to you, gain me a virtual 3 life, assuming he has nothing else to do, or you can think about it like gain me 3 life, give him 3 dice back.
Sure,
which is like a card that you would never play.
Assuming though, there's a certain level of assumption that's made there that he has something to do with those 3 dice, and to Nick's point, when he's auditing his hand and deciding whether to scream or not scream, you don't know whether that's going to be worth 1 or 3 or 4. You just don't know.
Right, but unless he's actually up against the wall, this is the same point again. Unless you're playing Jessa and you're actually like you have to meditate a bunch, you can't activate your books, you don't have any relevant cards in hand.
Sure.
Are you already losing and the choke doesn't matter? Like, you know what I mean? Like you're behind in all categories already. So like, is the choke really that important to you winning or losing?
You have to be committed to some line that can turn the table, right? Like there has to be a line that can turn the table. You have to play to your outs. So if you're behind, you might as well just say, well, I'm behind, I'll concede then, right? That's the same kind of train of thought.
Not at all.
So
like, it's just, I'm just talking about like,
sure,
the outcome of the game, like what percentage the choke actually affects it. Because if you have a grip full of cards and you have books to activate and you choke me, so I have like potential extra dice that I would have screamed with, but I can spend those dice to the battlefield or other cards, then your choke hasn't done very much.
Sure.
But if I can't do those things, did your choke do anything at all? Because I already couldn't do anything to you besides 3 damage. Like, if I could put my opponent on not play spells but do 3 damage to me, I would.
Sure. Maybe.
Those damage things can really matter at the end. Like, there was a possible hand in Phil's deck at the end of Game 6 where I think with the right rolls and the right cards in hand, he had a burst damage combo that I think could have stole the game from me, but that combo didn't show up early, so I knew I didn't have to worry about that, and I didn't have to stay above a certain life threshold to not just die immediately.
Right. And you obviously, it was one of your more aggressive scream games with seven screams in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously Jess is a very interesting conversation, and we dubbed this season the Season of the Witch because of the 7 Jesses that came in.
It was actually the Season of the Vampire.
Well, yeah, but that's where I was
just like I said going in, I'm like, there are 7 Jesses, but there's also a bunch of Heralds.
3 Heralds. And it's not the most Heralds we've seen in a season, because we had 5 Heralds in Season 2, and one of those Heralds made finals. Carl's Herald made finals against Matt. But
it was 75% of the top 4, right?
Yeah, it was a big part of the top 4 for sure.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
So you kind of, I think one of the things I want to talk about with Harold, I mean, not uncoincidentally with these mirrors that occurred inside of the top 8, we got to a place where the game time extended immensely, right? Like we
played some long games.
We saw some very long games in top 8, top 4, and obviously the finals was a marathon grind session. And obviously we're going to correct that through a rules component, right? Like we're going to put a time limits in Season 5 and sudden death rules from the organized play that you've put out as a solution to that. But I have been then sort of intrigued by Harold in that respect again, because I played Harold a lot in AIL and never had these sort of marathon games. I don't remember them that way anyways. And so I thought, is there a more proactive Harold, right? And I haven't found it yet. I just want to be really clear. If I had found it, I'd share it with the chat. But I'm curious, do you feel like Harold, like obviously because Harold just took over here, you only went 90 minutes in your first Season 5 practice game, so you're 20 minutes over. Did you execute sudden death rules, Inquisitor? But my question is, like when we look at this and we look at Harold and the way Harold wants to play the game, is Harold actually just bad now? Like because of time limits, is Harold just not competitive? I mean, is that a thing that do you think that's a thing that could happen here? Do you how do you evaluate Harold yourself after seeing Season 4 and how it played out?
So one thing that I think Harold is able to do very well because of his ability is you don't have to put guard pressure on your opponent early. You can just do your mark prey attack whenever the right attack is lined up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas kind of other Phoenixborn, you need to make some more pressuring attacks, like, oh, I'll have my Hammer Knight attack your bear, and that'll soak up your guard, or I'll have my 1/1 attack your 2/1, and they don't want to take that trade. So, like, a lot of aggressive decks are centered around pressuring. Herald doesn't have to do that, so I think he can get away with more setup things while still playing to the battlefield very powerfully. Like Three-Eyed Owl can come down, and as if you just have like that one mid-sized unit, like Mark plus Frostback Bear takes down a knight.
You just need 1 2-power guy in play at all times during your turn, and your opponent can never play a guy that they're happy about.
Yeah, it's really hard to get the jump on Herald.
I'll tell you that
because he gets the best attack every round whenever he wants.
I played Herald in Season 2 and played to a 2/3, and it's not as easy as you think it is. It looks easy when you see great players like Jason and Carl play it and Brian play it. Like, it looks extremely easy.
Jesse, I think you're losing you. You're breaking up.
Oh.
Jesse, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello?
Nick and I lost you there for a second.
I was just saying that I played Herald in Season 2. Carl and my list were very, very similar. He had Three-Eyed Owl. I did not run a Three-Eyed Owl. But our lists were, like, in terms of threats that it created, you know, the threats that were created by his deck and my deck were very similar outside of the Three-Eyed Owl. Now, when I played Herald in Season 2, one of the things that I ran into was, you know, if you don't draw Consume Soul, you can misuse Mark. And if you misuse Mark, it can punish you in the later rounds. Or the later part of that round. Not later rounds, the later part of that round. And so you can't just...
when you need it.
Right, when you need it. Again, exactly. So if you don't get Consume Soul, then there is this really delicate balance on Herald and playing Herald in terms of you probably still have to play it more like trying to pressure the Phoenixborn Guard. And that's interesting to me that's sort of the play line, but it to me, it incentivizes. Like, when I look at Herald now, and when I consider Herald and watching what happened in Season 4 and my experience in Season 2, it doesn't feel like you can actually be aggressive. Like, you actually need, like, these, I call them the punt main actions, you know? It's where you, like, call upon the realm, or, you know, you... I don't know. Take your pick of, like, main action punts, right?
Harold literally is incentivized not to do anything,
right?
Because of how he works.
Absolutely.
And I mean, eventually, he can be aggressive in that he can supply multiple threats to the battlefield even in round 1, but he's not incentivized to do so until late in the round because he wants you to do your thing. Like, he needs to just play a 2-power unit and sit on it while you do whatever you're doing, and then he gets to pick the best attack at, you know, when you're both down to 2 dice or whatever.
I understand the theory of how it works, but what I have found is that aggressive, when we say the term aggressive, right, when I talk about Herald being aggressive and not wanting to sit back, I think part of the Herald design actually leads to these really long game states because of exactly what we're talking about. You want to punt. So, like, Three-Eyed Owl is a perfect punt, right? You play the owl, you get another punt turn where you can, like, memory drain, right? You know, you can do what Jason did and Brian did and, like, recur Salamander Monk or recur Three-Eyed Owl and do it again, right? And so you get, like, you get round 1, you get 14 actions or something instead of the normal 8 that comes out of most decks. And you just, because you want your opponent to spend out before you have to commit the mark. I think
the more you stall, the more pressure comes down on them to drop something, and then you get the best attack right away. So it's very strangling in that sense, where you're just like, okay, it's you gotta put down your thing eventually, and once you do, it's gone.
But my problem is it leads to these. It doesn't convert to PB damage, right? That's one thing that sort of happens because you see it a lot with, like, Sonic Swordsman, right? Or Frostback Bear, which would normally in a normal aggressive shell probably try to open up the Terrify to put PB damage because that's sort of your primary win con. So it doesn't put a lot. well, just in general. I mean, I'm using generalities here, but there's
I think Prospect Bear attacks other units much more often than it attacks face.
I don't know, but
I think
I don't want to get off of my point here with Harold. My point is that when I have played Harold a lot, I have struggled to see is unless you have that consume soul round where you can get double mark, you really can't commit early to anything. And because you can't do that, I think it leads to these really long game states. And so that's why my question is, Nick, for you, like even aggressive Herald, I don't know what that actually is because I've tried to play a more aggressive version of Herald that can, to Neil's point, still stick a two attack unit that's just hanging out for a big unit to come into play. It actually leads itself to a position where it just can't close the game. And I'm curious if you're going to try to do that in a 50-minute time limit in a real in-person tournament, or you're going to try to do that in Shufflebus 5 on a 70-minute timer, or 35 minutes per player if we can get the chess clocks enabled. Do you think Harold's going to come? Like, do you think Harold bubbles back up again? I mean, or is this just a product of no time limits? That's my question to you on it. I'm curious about it.
Yeah. Does adding time limits reduce the effectiveness of this Herald strategy?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say.
Well,
because if this Herald is playing a very efficient game still and not progressing a lot, like we could see Herald do Owl, Ruby Cobra, and pressure the opponent's cards, stay very frugal by using ready spells, and like a lot of the stuff that are in those top 2 Herald decks do give you the resources for the long game. So even when sudden death fatigue hits in, it's possible that these defensive Heralds could still have just enough cards left and enough life total saved up and healed from consumed soul that they win in fatigue damage. And the point of fatigue damage is it will very rapidly bring the game to a natural conclusion with both respect to battlefield damage, burn damage, and also the general resource efficiency and mill plan.
Well, certainly sudden death does
that. There's still a pretty big differential in decks. Yeah.
But I mean, to me, what I hear when you say that, just personally, what I hear when you say that is play mill, right? Because if you're going to play Herald, you better play a mill Herald because you're going to go to time and then you're ahead because of the tiebreaker essentially favoring mill a little bit better.
Well, it's first off, like the chess clock and the actual like tournament rules timer are very different questions. But in a 50-minute sit-down tournament, like I think it will win the same amount that it wins now, and that the timer won't have much effect on it, because at least the games that we saw, the way that those decks win, they win by just like the tiniest margin of advantage every round.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just shave off like 1 dice or like half a card's worth of advantage going into the next round every time. Super grindy. And that's the kind of thing that, assuming both players are playing fair with the timer, nobody's slow playing, that when the time comes, you should still be very even, assuming both like perfect play on both halves, and assuming that this is even a game that would go to time, because if there's an aggro deck, it's either going to win or lose fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only time limit games that we're going to talk about are these grindy control matchups where it's just like the resources are so close at all times. Like we watched the finals, Brian against Jason, where like literally they both had like the same number of cards available to them at every juncture of the game. And they were both taking the same amount of fatigue damage, and like it, in a state like that, it's still even. It's just going to come down the same way, I think, as it would otherwise, just quicker, because the fatigue affects the play, like both players equal.
Sure. I mean, when we look at if we go back to the 70-minute mark of that game, Brian's ahead on deck. Or maybe not by the 70-minute mark. He might have been behind on deck by 70 minutes, but he was ahead on deck before the first hour was complete. right? Because that's when he pivoted to the magic siphon because he was already ahead on deck. And that if you were in sudden death fatigue, Brian's advantaged at that point because of the decking, right? Like he can just go. He could have not pivot to magic siphon, stay on owl, just knowing that sudden death is going to contribute to the speed of the defeat of his opponent, and he's already ahead by some.
Right.
factor.
I mean, it will change some lines. Like you should still play knowing that that's going to happen, which is new.
Mm-hmm.
But that I don't think that favors one player or the other, and I don't think it necessarily favors Mill.
Well,
as long as the battlefield deck is aggressive.
I'm not sure I agree completely with that, because if every turn that you take you're losing 2 cards off the top of your deck, that's advancing a Mill strategy.
It's also just doing 2 damage to you, which is like.
Well, it doesn't if you're taking cards off the top. Once the cards are gone, then you're taking damage. But before that, it's just taking cards.
I don't think that we can make that distinction at this juncture yet, because we don't. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I just don't know that you're right, because just like what Nick just said, it was designed in a way that it puts pressure on all aspects of the game, where it puts pressure on your life resource, it puts pressure on your card's resource, and by extension of the life resource, it puts pressure on the battlefield.
Well, and look, all I'm saying is that my question was really for Nick's analysis on, can Harold do this in appropriate time? Like, can he actually win?
Do you know how many rounds that finals went?
I can tell you quick. Hold on.
7?
I think it was 7.
I guess 7, but I'm not sure. As far as the chess clock goes, that's a little different. I think that will favor whichever player is more practiced at playing their deck, because you're not sharing the time used, so there's no advantage to being gained by slow play or whatever.
Yes.
So you're at like a slight disadvantage.
Skill testing.
Yeah, you're at like a slight disadvantage if you're on a deck like you described that has a lot of main actions, where your opponent can just pass and you have to like click on stuff. Mm-hmm. Like that's physical time of doing it. And from playing Magic Online, which has the chess clock, you can get under the gun pretty good sometimes when you're just like doing some stuff that's a lot of actions and your opponent's just on auto pass.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get down to it. But I think Ashes had a lot less of that, because the things that really took time in Magic were like looping stuff, where you did the same action like 70 times or whatever in the game.
Yeah, just goofy combos.
It was 7 rounds. 7 rounds to completion.
So a 7-round game is definitely well above the average that games of Ashes are completed in. Like all of my games were like 4-round games. I had one that was 3. Maybe we dipped into round 5, the top 4 game. I again just didn't take very good notes in that game, but by and large, most of my games were 4-rounders there. So it is weird when you see 2 decks that have this efficiency system built into them, and they're even on battlefield Phoenix Born abilities. I think there's something to be said about the mirror match.
Sure, I agree.
Contributing to this, because you don't get a situation where one Phoenix Born has a distinct path to more damage over the other. Kind of like how James had a strong battlefield advantage over Jessa, gave an advantage, and the wider that advantage, perhaps maybe the games end a little bit more decisively. But we did have a mirror match in terms of Phoenix Born, some similarities in spell boards, and with both of them just playing these class and basic cost units that don't always get through for damage or aren't doing like overkill over time. It's just the battlefield keeps filling up and trading evenly and refreshing, and not a lot of progress happens, but also for not a lot of cost from hand. So it's so resource efficient, and when you put 2 of those up against each other, the long-term costs are just going to move so slowly, I think.
Well, assuming that Harold can handle other matches in reasonable timelines, right? That's an assumption, because we obviously don't have every match from Jason. And
all of these Harold games didn't it. didn't go 7 rounds, right?
Right. But assuming that can happen, which we don't know for sure because there was no timers involved in this season, it would indicate to a certain degree when we saw all 3 heralds played and all 3 heralds make top 8 and ultimately top 4 in finals, that you're gonna see these at top tables at some point, and mirror matches are gonna exist. So I'll be curious to see how the meta evolves with the timers in season 5. I just wanted to get your hot take on it.
Yeah, I would say the herald that is able to pivot into mill and more efficiency. Yeah, the games are still going to go long. You're going to hit that time limit on death or whatever. But whoever leans more into spending resources, affecting those end game things,
sure,
might get the edge there.
Yeah,
and it goes back to our Magic Siphon discussion where we thought Magic Siphon might be the best card to help with that, but it could very well be that basic cost summons were actually more important, and I don't know how many allies Brian had to. Yeah, if Brian had to fill the battlefield up with more allies. Totally.
It'll be interesting to see. I just was curious what your hot take was on it. Seeing Harold come out the victor, and obviously, if you put yourself through the 3 hours of watching that, both Brian and Jason, Cam, I'm sure it was, but both of those guys played immensely well. And I think the only mistake that Brian made in my mind in that entire game couldn't have been considered a mistake at the time he made it, and that was when he made the big attack with the crescendo to blow up 3 units, and like it looked like he was going to gain battlefield tempo and really turn the corner on Jason, but Jason still just had 8 dice left when that happened. Like the timing was just a little off on it.
Yeah,
and that left Brian down to like 3 dice to his 8, right? And at that point, that's when Jason made up all of the lost tempo and advantage was made up in those 8 dice before.
Right. That's definitely the kind of turn where a consume is so good.
Right.
And the books matter a lot there.
Yeah.
The Magic Siphon's not helping you recover from that.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So yeah, I was very, I think in the heat of the moment, that looks like the right play 95% of the time, right? And anytime you could say, okay, I'm going to make a profitable attack that's going to take 3 units off my opponent's board, you're probably going to make that attack, like maybe even 99% of the time. But in that particular situation, it takes all of Brian's tempo away for the rest of the round. So
and if these efficient heralds are kind of relying on the opponent to maybe exhaust a lot of resources to come back from there, you can play that more grindy defensive style. But when matched with another very efficient book focused deck, it's like getting them to recommit isn't costing them as much as it would like if they kept dropping knights that I was killing. It's just these basic class conjurations refilling for no additional commitment.
Yeah, the best herald that I ever had any experience with was my AIL herald, and that was just I had frostbites, and so I could punt a lot and still do something to progress my win, right? So
frostbite punishes going 7 rounds if you're like, okay, this is similar to Scream's a good way to spend dice over time when the battlefield's not a threat.
Right, exactly. So I mean obviously like we saw more than that. We saw, Killer on a Leo, German on Echo making top 8. So some of the cast of characters that have made top 8s in the past all showed their face here, and then James being a newcomer in season 4 to top 8. And obviously Jessa being a top 8 newcomer as well, because I don't think Brian took top 8 in season 1, if I remember correctly. And Carl will probably tell me I'm wrong. That was like a lifetime ago at this point. But the thing that's interesting to me is that there was 3 heralds that entered and 3 heralds came out and 2 of them made tops. And obviously one of them won it, and that makes a pretty bold statement about Herald when you think about it from a recap perspective. And
Yeah.
I do wonder how well these heralds would function if the field had a well-designed Odette in it. There was just no Odette this season. Because Odette can really punish an owl. Like, really punish an owl. Or an Airedale. Like, we didn't really have a big Airedale list this season either. Like, Philly's 4-book Airedale really didn't...
Phil's on Jess at this time.
Right. So I just wonder if some of those... The inclusion of some of those Phoenixborns keeps Herald kind of not tamped down, but just like a little bit more in control. You know what I mean? Like they're another version of control.
And there's also the particle shield from season 2's Cole Matt's deck. That gave Harold a lot of grief, I remember. So there's maybe some things that just weren't around this.
Right. I do wonder about that in this season. I mean, and we're talking about a recap on this season. So I think lots of people could pick up Brian or Jason's decks and watch our coverage and be fairly competitive with these lists. But I mean, that doesn't mean that you're going to be guaranteed to hit a top table playing one of these two decks, because they are not easy. And that's a testament to the decision points that have to be made. I do hope that as the field of Shufflebus expands, like kind of leading into season 5, because we're getting close to needing to wrap the show up tonight. Like going into season 5, I'm hoping we'll have more players than ever, and I'm hoping we have an even more diverse PB spread.
I still hope that we get to a point where it's less diverse, but I mean, obviously we want more people. But ultimately, like the meta will get stronger when people figure out what's good, and it won't happen next season, because next season we're adding 20 cards to the pool. It's just going to be
and 2 Phoenixborns.
Nonsense.
Yeah,
right.
The
always changing.
Yeah. But I do think like I mean, I would love for us to sit down sometime, Neil, and maybe we can do this on a show before season 5 starts and sort of rank this meta's Phoenixborns in a tier system. I know we've talked about it offline a little bit, but I would like us to do that, because I think some of the best Phoenixborns that would make the list for me as being, you know, whether they're S tier or A tier, we could debate for a while on, but at least being A tiers would be Odette and Airedale, and they just weren't present. I mean, they just weren't here. And
yeah, that's a notable...
I mean, I think they definitely could have been. People just wanted to play other things.
Sure. I agree.
Like I was saying at the beginning of the show, like the community likes to play new stuff when it comes to like the new season. So,
well, and I get it. Like, I understand that. I mean, certainly I did that as well. Cam wants the season of the wolf. Noah. I think that's a pretty high ask, Cam. No offense to Noah. I think that Noah list we watched last week was super awesome, but I think it's got too many bad matchups. Like, just in general, too many bad matchups. And if you don't draw, like, we watched that deck produce second and third Mass Wolf book by round 3. I
think that deck wins in closed deck a lot, probably.
Sure. Like, yeah, I mean,
you just it just, like, we watched that first 5 and he just took 8 damage or whatever because he was not prepared for the speed that it came with.
I
but
think
in an open deck list, it's going to be much harder to do something like that.
Well, I agree with that statement for sure. I still think that it's hard to answer that, the speed of that deck in general. But once you stabilize the board, if you don't get second Mass Wolf book, I don't think you can keep the tempo up. And the deck is not built in a way to make that, to accelerate to second Mass book, right? Like, it's not open memorizing for it. It's not like hard meditating in a druid to get it. I mean, it's not doing those things, right? And so
it can't. The power of the deck comes from speed, so it can't do those extraneous things to get there.
Agreed, 100%. And so then it really does come down to luck of the draw in round 2 for that second book. And if
it has a lot of copies of the impactful cards, and even if, like, I'm not sure that it's just second book is the only thing it can draw. It just needs to draw like another Gates or a second book.
Sure.
And it did both, so it went absolutely nuts. But
right, that's what I'm saying. I think what we saw is the pinnacle of that deck's performance on stream that day. Like from an odds perspective, I think we saw.
Yeah, I mean,
as the best
I made
version.
that comment a couple times in the commentary. Obviously, that it ran really hot.
Yeah, so I think when you look at it and you play many games with that deck, I imagine there are games where you don't draw Gates and you don't draw second Mass Wolf Book in round 2, and do you just lose? Like, because you've lost any tempo.
I think the deck has draws that it can, like, that don't involve second Wolf Book that it can win with. Do I think it's much harder? Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes from, like, I don't think you played an open deckless tournament because people will be like, oh, he's doing this cheesy stuff, and you just like hold up some frog pings, and then his lock for or you like play crescendo or something. Like the whole thing that it was like the deck was protected by the Lightbringer because you had no main actions. So if you like start anything that's not a main action that kills Immortal Commander, you get to win. So like you just like first five your crescendo, and even if you're down a card, when you attack off the Lightbringer and crescendo his commander, then what does he do?
Right. Absolutely. I just think that's been
stuff. Yep.
My takeaways from watching it back. But I think there's also lots of opportunity where if you have the natural dice to ping off the side action, you can still take away the large wolf threat. And really reduce the effectiveness.
Just having a frog really screws that up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's lots of openings in that deck. So again, that's why I don't think we're going to see the season of the wolf cam. No offense. I think the deck is cool, and I think it does really powerful things. And to me, it's the perfect example, like the best example of an aggro deck I've seen yet. An actual low to the ground aggro deck.
Sweet, yeah.
So whether that's good enough. Yeah. But that's just a product of, I think, everybody having 10 mana every round. It's whereas like in a traditional resource ramping type card game, these low to the ground decks are very efficient and they're very powerful and they are faster than other decks in getting set up.
Totally.
But you don't really get that speed.
Top of the game has a different texture.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't get that speed when you have everybody has 10 dice and 5 cards, to start the game. So yeah. I mean, in a Magic game, you might play turn 1, you might play 1 card from your hand or maybe 2, just depending on, if you're playing an aggro deck, you hope to play 2. Right? You hope to play like a land, make a haste unit and get that 1 drop that can do 2, right out of the gate on your first turn. Yeah, I think Noah's possibly a Kingmaker. That's a possibility here, Cam. But I think your Astria deck is closer to a Kingmaker deck than Noah will be, personally. I think that the Red King Astria and your Astria, both of those lists do very similar things, and I think that your 2 lists are more Kingmaker decks than Noah will be long term. I think there's a Kingmaker Fiona deck out there too. But
I don't know about that.
Neil's rolling his eyes, but I have played against some pretty nasty Mind Maze Fiona decks, recurring Mind Mazes.
Mind Maze is a cool card. It's really good in first 5. It's less good later.
Well, it depends. So I'll leave it at that. It's a punishing card. Because there are certain timing windows that exist inside of an Ashes round that can be really taken away from Mind Maze. Fiona's life pool is a huge problem for her. And her ability is just okay. Like Phoenixborn ability is just okay.
Very powerful, but it's all built around me, right? Like it's not like
we could maybe see Generosity be a card to patch up some of Fiona's weaknesses.
Generosity seems like it'd be a perfect fit for Fiona.
Healing, card draw to do more. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, I agree, Warrior. I mean, that seems like a pretty good line, but it maybe gets 1 card. I have been less impressed with second Owl in round one whenever I've tried to do it, whether that's through gates or whether that's through the Druid refresh. The second owl has been
right. Mind Maze is cool in the first 5, especially if you start an owl, like, because Mind Maze is just like target player discards a card, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because you either get their best guy with it before it gets to attack, so they've essentially discarded that, or they discard a card from their hand to kill it.
Yeah,
like it's just
Cam. I'm not saying that double owl isn't good. I've just, in my experience, and just playing Ashteki games, right? So that's closed. Nobody knows I'm going to do a double owl. Most decks play. They spit out 4 cards in 4 turns, roughly. I mean, there are some decks that will hold 2 cards, but the second they see owl, and assuming they have an answer for the first owl, by the time you get the second owl out, they're down to maybe 1 card in hand, and they just play it before you get to memory drain. So that last owl does maybe force an inopportune timing play for that card, maybe, but it's not actually. I don't think it's actually doing anything at that point. I've just played enough of it that I'm not convinced double owl's that great. At least in my experiences. I'm sure there's some matchup where it's like an absolute blowout, right? Like Coal Abundances and slashes down, he's got 1 card left, and you double owl, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I guess I'm just gonna lose this card now. But I just can't engineer a game state where I've actually found that to be valuable, and it's taken me 5 of my turns, and that whole time my opponent's playing to the board and beating me down while I'm trying to do it. It's tough.
It takes a lot of time.
It takes forever. It's like an eternity to get that second.
Yeah, it's actually 7 actions to make them discard the second card, right? It's
first
book,
action's
owl, book owl, memory drain.
Then gates.
Essence Druid.
Gates is a side action if you don't essence. If you don't do the essence druid, the fastest is gates.
So 6.
Gates and Fiona are a main action faster.
Yeah, Gates and Fiona will take it down to 6.
It's actually 2 main actions faster than the Druid version. So 5 is correct, yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's impact in most games. I mean, here's a good litmus test if you think this is good. When you play standard Ashes, playing your regular decks, just watch how many turns your opponent takes before they're down to 1 card in it. It's under 8.
Mm-hmm.
In many, many cases, it's under 8. And so that really means second owl is only probably good 5% of the time. And it was probably the first owl was good enough at that point.
Yeah, it's very matchup dependent. But that is a reason why Mind Maze is really good in a combination with owl.
I agree.
Like
Mind Maze and owl are like a match made in heaven, right? Like 100%. But
yeah, because that's only 4 actions. And one is like immediate after the other.
Right. So again, I think that Fiona can be a gatekeeper. I don't think Fiona's going to win a tournament. Now, watch, Matt's going to play Fiona next season and get top 4.
He's going to beat you for sure.
Well, probably, but whatever. I've only beat Matt once in my entire Ashes career. So, but I did it when it mattered. That's all I'm going to say. To win sweet dice for Shufflebus 5.
There you go.
But yeah, I like Owl. I find Owl to be, it's a great pressure card for 1 dice. It's a great stall card for 1 dice. And
it's probably the best card in the game.
I still think there are other cards that compete for best card in the game.
They can compete, but they'll always get second. I mean,
I'm not sure I'm going to be that definitive on it. This is another thing I'd love for us to do is like a Mount Rushmore, like our 4 best cards.
Okay, well, it's Owl.
Well, we don't have to do it right now.
3 other things. I don't.
I'm just saying, like a Mount Rushmore, like the 4 best cards in the game. What's your 4 best cards? Because I think what's interesting, because I think there is, I think there are play styles for certain players, myself included. Nick can probably attest to this as well because Nick tends to play.
You're just saying the cards you like the best, not that are actually good.
The 4 best cards in the game, but I think they're going to be sprinkled a little bit, like by play styles, right? Like certain cards are more control-y cards, right? So you may not play very much Owl because you're like, but yeah, I mean, Cam's saying Owl and Salamander. Okay, I can get behind those two cards. But then is it Raptor Herder? Raptor Herder's pretty darn good one die.
Yeah, there's a lot of strong cards kind of at that top tier of just like,
that's what I'm saying. So if you had to
play all of the
once you get past Owl and then Lightbringer, I think that the rest of it is pretty cloudy. Like, you could make arguments for a lot of stuff.
Well, I mean, you can't leave Frostback Bear out, right? It's the most impactful
card. Right, I think it's definitely... Well, it's not as good as Owl or Lightbringer, but it's definitely in the conversation.
Right. So this is why my Mount Rushmore, I think Mount Rushmore for players in Ashes is really interesting, because I think that's actually, if you had to pick the 4 best cards in your mind, it's going to be influenced by the styles of decks that you prefer to play.
Well, I would try to do it without any influence based on my preference, just on like what is the most powerful.
But I mean, you can make an argument Glowfinch is up there.
That I don't agree.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that you should count loyalty cards. I still think that Owl and Lightbringer are better than all loyalty cards. But if you start counting loyalty cards, then like Fear is maybe the next one.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. Like I'm putting no stipulations on it. I'm just saying, pick your 4 best cards. If you had to pick 4 cards that you said these are the best cards, what would the Mount Rushmore be? And
Slice and Dice.
Slice and Dice.
Is that what that card was called? What was the old Jericho loyalty?
Double Edge.
Double Edge. There you go.
Yeah, that was a good one.
So bottom line is, like, I think that would be a fun practice, and it'd be fun to have our viewers submit their Mount Rushmores as well.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
It'd just be I'd be fun and curious to see like what our viewers think is the 4 best cards, and what we can discuss what our 4 best cards are on a show. But I think that you'd be surprised how much things are going to be changed. I mean, we're already getting chat doing this, right? Like here's Inquisitor coming in and going Owl, Lightbringer, Bear, and Nature's Wrath. Right.
That's a bunch of cards.
Right. I mean, those are great cards. All of those cards are good. They have huge impacts on the game. Maybe I don't agree with that, though. All right. Maybe you don't agree with that, Neil. Right. So that's.
I mean, there's no Salamander on there. Salamander's
that's right.
Certainly.
Contender. If you add the loyalty cards, it becomes just nonsense, because you're going to say Owl, Lightbringer, and then everybody's going to pick one of like Fear, Sword, Chaos Gravity,
Earthquake.
Yeah. I mean,
Earthquake's pretty good.
I mean, but that's the point, though. That's the whole point of this exercise, is that it's your personal Mount Rushmore, right? So it's not actually about, say, this is definitively the 4 best cards in Ashes, because I don't think anybody in this conversation, Nick included, could actually do that. I don't think anybody could actually do that, because the differential between, how good is Raptor Herder compared to Owl. Raptor Herder can be a very impactful open.
Well, it's not as good as Owl, because nothing's as good as Owl.
That's your opinion. I don't necessarily agree with you.
It is factual. Even if nobody can literally come to the distinction themselves because we don't have enough data, there definitely is in the game 4 cards ranked 1 through 4 based on percentage of games won because of impacts. Like that just has to exist.
Kaya's data has to support that based on 4 seasons already. But
absolutely, that's not even close to a large enough sample size.
Well,
there's so many variations in the field of what people can play and what you're playing against.
My point is that Owl doesn't actually even make the top 10 list on that in terms of win percentages. Like, when you go look at Kaya's data that was posted in Shufflebus,
right, and that's why the data is at this juncture a fallacy, because if you look at the top 4 matches of this tournament, they were dominated by Owl. It wasn't even just that they were in the decks. Every game was an Owl game. Like, no other card has much of an impact on the top 4 matches as Three-Eyed Owl.
Yeah. I mean, I agree in this tournament, in this particular tournament.
Which was the largest and most competitive tournament that we've ever had.
I'm just saying that we've got 3 other seasons that wasn't true. So, I think it's a broad generalization to put a stamp on Owl as the best card right now. I think it's a very good card.
Literally, people already said that in the Discord like 2 weeks ago.
I think it's for good. Inquisitor says, funny nobody has mentioned any of the Knights yet. I think it's for good reason, but interesting. Yeah, I think Knights are just middling, right? Like, Knights are powerful.
They're all good. They all serve a purpose, but when we're talking about the literal best cards, not only do they have to be incredibly powerful, they also have to be very efficient and very unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to gain a resource edge against Owl. It's much more the case that you just have to deal with its consequences in the best way you can.
So
if you take advantage of the fact that it doesn't provide any offensive pressure.
So if we're looking at the resource efficiency, I would agree Owl is one of the most resource efficient units in the game. But I think it's right up there. I think you can make that same argument for Raptor Herder in terms of being able to deal with the Raptor threats.
Sure, Raptor Herder is actually more resource efficient than Owl.
Sure.
But Raptor Herder doesn't say one dice, you have to spend your entire first 5 playing around me.
Maybe. I mean, I'm not sure yet.
It literally breaks your first 5.
The other to point there's I mean, Turtle Guard is also another example of a card that you can't resource efficiently deal with, right? So no matter what you do, you're going to spend more resources in the Turtle Guard than they spent to make it over the course of
I think Turtle Guard's a good card. I don't think it's in the top 4, but it's like top 15.
I think Ruby Cobra is an interesting card, Inquisitor. I'm not sold on the Cobra 100% yet, but we'll see. We'll see if it has a big impact on the meta. I think. I mean, I've been on the record as saying I think the Ember Root Lizard is a better O2 across the board.
Oh yeah.
But Cam says Brandon Raptor Herder hurts.
Strong conjurations.
Yeah, they're both really good, right? I think any of these one dice conjurations like that can do something on the game are going to be powerful because they're hard to deal with efficiently. Like that's the same problem with Salamander Monk, right? Like you can't spend just one resource into Salamander Monk. It just doesn't work that way. Like even if you have to block it, you spent resources into it. If you have to attack into it, you spent resources into it. If you Nature's Wrath it, you spend resources into it. If you slash it, you spend resources into it. It's on the same par, but I think because look, Owl looked fantastic this season, I mean we can end it on that. But I just think that you can't use Mount Rushmore as saying it's because it's the best card is because it's most resource efficient and because it can disrupt a first 5. Yes, but I think there's lots of cards that can do that in specific matchups. And right, so
like you're saying all these cards can do the same thing Owl does, and here's the caveat as to how. Whereas when I say Owl does this, it just does.
But I don't care about if I can just play Odette and then I never worry about an Owl again.
That's fine.
Right. So my point is like
there are lots of units that do that don't do what Owl does. Like there are lots of units you can say Odette just enter the phrase and they die, and they're worse than Owl because they don't have all the like many upsides Owl has. Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean Owl is the best card in the game. It just means that in certain matchups, Owl is extremely good. I mean, that's all I'm saying.
I think you would be hard pressed to find a matchup Owl is not good in.
I just gave you one. I just played one last week where Owl did 0.
Okay. So it didn't do 0 first. It used your Enter the Fray, and that is you're right. You mitigated the Owl as like to the maximum that you can mitigate it. Right.
But you could do the same thing with Airedale. One die, you spend one die to their one die to.
Well, then and that's worse. Like you're still.
It's worse than Odette. I agree.
And so you are making corner cases instead of generalizations. When we're talking about the best card in the game, like you need to think about it over the course of the game. So this one matchup against Odette, you're right. It's at its weakest. It's still very good. It's one matchup against Airedale. It's at its second weakest. It's still very good. Like, and then we start talking about all the other matchups, which is many other matchups, and it's insane.
Carl says Owl sucks. I know, Carl, that's a joke. All right. The bottom line is that I mean, there's been lots of conversation about Owl beyond round 1 being less meaningful. And I mean, you've seen
That is factual. After round one, it is worse than it is in round one. But we saw in this tournament, the largest and most competitive Ashes tournament we've had in a long time, that it is still impactful the rest of the game and dominated the top 8 of this tournament.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, what more can you ask of the best card of the game than that?
I think that it's all because of the matchups that it looks so good. Yeah, I think it's all because of the matchups that it looks so good. That's what I think, and that's my take on it from watching season 4. So that's my recap. Owl looked extremely good in this season. It has not looked as good in other seasons. It has been in other seasons, no doubt. But you know, I think that what this says is that you have to have a plan to deal with Owl, but you have to have a plan to deal with fast, explosive Brennan starts. You have to have a plan to deal with.
No, you have to be okay with losing to one of 10 things or whatever. You can't have a plan.
I do think it is worth saying that like the corner cases that Jesse did point out were also those exclusions from this season,
right?
And it's not because they're bad Phoenix-born. It's just too small.
I think Odette is really good.
Yeah.
Like, I think Airedale's really good.
In season 4 doesn't mean that.
Right. That's why I'm not ready to make a definitive stamp that Owl's the best card in the game. I'm just not. But that's fine. I mean, you can certainly argue that.
The Phoenix-born that have tools against it weren't around.
Right. And so I think it made Owl look as good as Owl could possibly look this season. That's all I'm going to say. And it looked very good. No doubt. It's a great card. It's easily in the top tier of cards. I'm not arguing that at all. But I think there are other top tier cards out there that could arguably be just as good based upon matchups. And that's the same thing that I'm saying with the Owl. Matchup dependent. It's matchup dependent. So, yeah, I mean, if your opponent doesn't deal with the Owl, it looks you get crushed. But like you can say the same thing about other things too. I mean, there are other plays that can happen that are exactly the same way. So that's just the way I see it. But anyways, we have hit 8:30. We made it through the Shufflebus Season 4 recap. What an interesting season it's been. Nick, thanks for spending so much time with us. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I hope you play in Season 5. We enjoyed having you through this season. And obviously, your write-up was to me, was like the highlight of the close of the season, just being able to go back and read that. So again, if you haven't seen that, it's linked in the chat above. Go read that. It's a lengthy read, but it's well worth it just to understand a lot of what was going on in Nick's mind and how Jessa plays. And obviously it teaches you a lot about not only how to play Jessa, how to play against her, but also just like thinking about certain lines, first 5 decisions, all of that stuff. It's just a wealth of information there. And Nick, we look forward to Oric and Lulu kicking off Season 5, but we're also excited for what's next. So we can't wait to kind of hear what's coming after we get these Phoenix-borns out here in the next, hopefully 30 to 60 days. That's kind of what we're all crossing our fingers on. So
indeed, yeah.
I'd love to have me some Lulu and Oric before Christmas. Let's just put it at that. I'm good with that for now. So
indeed, we'll provide an update as soon as it becomes relevant.
Yep.
And yep, you got it.
Yeah. So Nick, thanks
so
again.
much, guys.
Yeah, appreciate your time tonight. Have a great evening. We'll see you all Tuesday night with some more Ashes coverage. Take care, everybody.
Cool. Yep. Good night, guys. See you.